Welcome to night 3 of the 2026 Crime Waves Next Gen Exchange. We've had several amazing sessions already. If you missed the keynote on Monday about police responses to mental health crises, or the crime scene investigation demos last night, and the interview with superstar police chief Doreen Jokerst, I recommend checking out those recordings, which we'll be sending out to folks who registered, and you can share with those folks too. We'll send it out by the end of the week or the beginning of next week. As you may know, March is National Criminal Justice Month, and our Crime Waves Exchange is designed around this special month in promoting awareness, fostering professional growth, and having the critical conversations necessary to improve our justice system. If you're just joining us for the first time tonight, we are thrilled to have you. I am your host, Christopher Zaleski. I'm an associate professor of criminology with a law degree and police legal advisor training from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and have over 20 years of experience working in the criminal justice field, including as a state law enforcement officer and a chief probation officer. We are pleased to be part of the Chicago School, where we have a transformative dedication to educating the next generation of change makers in innovative theory and culturally competent practice to strengthen the integrated health of individuals, organizations, and communities. So at times this week, you're going to hear from me, other professors, and also students who are completing their bachelor's degree in criminology. We will also be joined by amazing leaders in their field across criminal justice. We had a really great turnout thus far of students, seasoned professionals, and community members all at the same table, and this is where the real work of shaping the future of justice happens. So before we get started with things tonight, I want to take a moment to tell you about our criminology program, as I'm the department chair. So here at the Chicago School, we don't just teach criminology, we apply it. Our BA in criminology and also our Master of Arts in Applied Forensic Psychology, they're designed for the modern world, offered 100% online to meet professionals and students where they are. So what makes us such a powerhouse is our early entry master's bridge, which allows undergraduate students to dive into graduate level work in forensic psychology, public health, or clinical mental health counseling. Students in the criminology forensic psychology specialization, they can actually take 20 credits of graduate coursework in forensic psych as part of their bachelor's degree. Upon graduation, they only have 10 more credits remaining to receive that Master of Arts in Applied Forensic Psychology. So besides taking these courses as part of the undergraduate degree, students get an additional 25% alumni tuition discount to then finish their master's degree, saving an incredible amount of money and time. So at the Chicago School, we believe education must be a catalyst for action. We aren't just discussing theory, we're cultivating the transformative practice necessary to improve the justice landscape for everyone. If you are also already working in the criminal justice field, we offer a special tuition rate. If you're interested in finding out more about our programs, please check out our website, thechicagoschool.edu, and everyone attending will receive some follow-up emails with more information about our school and how to access recordings and everything else you need to have. So what's ahead of us tonight? It's going to be an exciting night. We'll dive into the forensic psychology showcase and also a legal briefing on police use of force, which is going to be presented by me. Thursday, we will wrap up with our criminal profiling showcase and a look at re-entry and behavioral health. So, quick note for those with busy schedules, we know life happens on the front lines. If you miss the other sessions or you have to step away before the end of this exchange, all sessions are being recorded. You can watch the recordings at your convenience, and yes, you can still earn your digital badges by completing the requirements after viewing the replays, and we'll send you more information, like I said, about the badges and certificates of attendance at the end of the summit. Well, speaking of those badges, let's talk about your professional credentials. We want you to be able to demonstrate the expertise you're gaining here. Tonight's badge, well, by participating in this evening session, you'll receive the Forensic Psychology Analyst Preview Badge and also the Legal Standards Use of Force Advocate Badge. And for those who complete the full 4-night briefing series, either live or via recording, you'll earn the Next Gen Justice Practitioner micro-credential. These badges are going to be issued through Credly, making them easy to add to your LinkedIn profile or your digital resume. You will receive an email following the summit with specific instructions on how to actually claim them. So keep your eye on your inbox for that link. Our mission of the Chicago School is about more than just theory, like we said. It's about empowering the people who will put that theory into action. As you've already seen, this summit is dedicated to that next generation of justice. So I want to pass things to one of those future leaders to guide us into our first session tonight. Please join me in welcoming Grace Farrell, a student in our criminology program, to take the lead on introducing this next session.
Thank you, Professor Zaleski, for that intro. Good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Farrell, and I am currently a student in the Bachelor's Criminology program here at the Chicago School, and I'm currently having a specialization in forensic psychology. I'm taking graduate level forensic psychology courses that count towards both my bachelor's in criminology and my master's in forensic psychology. And I will be graduating with my bachelor's in August of this year, 2026. And I plan to continue my education with my master's program. But I am looking, oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking forward to finding an internship during this time, specifically with law enforcement for my criminology degree while I still attend school. Afterwards, I'm hoping to work with something with law enforcement, specifically police consultation. However, I do want to work with juveniles specifically, so I'm also leaning towards victim advocacy or something along that track. So before we move into our main session on the use of force, we are starting tonight with a 20-minute masterclass led by a member of our graduate faculty. In our program, we learn that forensic psychology is much more than just about the why behind a crime. It's a critical tool for understanding human behavior in the most high-stake environments imaginable. This showcase provides a professional look at how psychological principles are applied to real world legal questions, risk assessment, and behavioral analysis. We'll be examining criminology theories in relation to everything from the impact of violent media to the complexities of coerced confessions and mass hysteria. Whether we are looking at the cognitive drivers of a crisis or the profile of an offender, you're about to see exactly how behavioral science informs modern justice practices. So let me introduce you all to Dr. J. Garrett Meadows. He was one of my previous professors for one of my favorite courses I've taken this far, which was the treatment and evaluation of the juvenile offender for my forensic psychology degree. And Dr. Meadows is a graduate of the Chicago School's online forensic master's program and the clinical forensic doctor of psychology programs. He completed undergraduate degrees in behavioral sciences as well as criminal justice. Dr. Meadows has experience working in a community mental health center, a forensic psychiatric inpatient evaluation and treatment center, psychiatric state hospitals, and correctional facilities. During his doctoral training, he completed standard psychological evaluations as well as forensic evaluations, including violent risk assessments, psychosexual assessments, competence to stand trial assessments, and neuropsychological testing for cognitive impairment. Dr. Meadows has provided therapy services to incarcerated individuals participating in sexual offender treatment, as well as incarcerated males with substance use disorders. In a supervisory role, he provided oversight and direction to the substance use disorder assessment process, as well as the delivery of therapeutic services in a correctional intervention program. He has been teaching the Chicago School Master's online forensic psychology program since 2015. So, welcome, Dr. Meadows.
Yes, and thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Grace. And thank you, Chris, for inviting me to be a part of this. Give me just a second. I'm going to share my screen with you. Just to make sure that everyone can see this properly correct. Okay. Sorry, it's having an issue right there. All right. So tonight I'm going to be talking about criminological theories of violence and social behaviors. This is actually the title of a course that I'm currently developing within the criminology concentration of the Applied Forensic Master's program. So in this course, the primary focus is the application of criminology, forensic psychology, and social psychology to deviant, social, and criminal behaviors. This course examines theories of criminology in relation to social learning theory and violent media's impact on violent behavior, learning theory and multi-perpetrator homicide, the impact of labeling, stereotyping, and coerced confessions, wrongful convictions, as well as rational choice theory and criminal deviance. The first topic we're going to discuss is violent media's impact on violent behavior. So I have a couple of thought-provoking questions to get us started tonight. Do violent video games or other forms of violent entertainment serve as a gateway between fantasy and reality? What risk factors make an individual vulnerable to the potential effects of violent media or vulnerable to violent behavior? So throughout this presentation, you're going to see a lot of questions. And the main reason I'm doing that is because these are most likely questions that I'm going to be putting in the course, whether it's a part of discussions or assessments. I want students to really start thinking, kind of like beyond what's, in some of the like standard textbooks like that. Looking at answers for a lot of these things that may not have a simple yes or no explanation. So you're welcome to comment in the chat. I can always get caught up later about that. But really, this is just an opportunity for you to think more about some of these areas that I'm going to be discussing. So there is a established direct link between violent media and violent behavior. There is lots of research and data that shows that there is, in fact, a connection between the two. However, it's very important to keep in mind that violent media affects every person differently. Each person is not going to be affected the same way. For example, there's many individuals who may enjoy violent video games, watch a lot of violent films, may listen to violent music, and they don't have a history of violent behavior. They don't have any kind of aggressive behaviors or anything like that either. Whereas others who may have a history of violent behaviors and a lot of maybe anger issues that do consume violent media can have a potential negative effect on them, and it can contribute to violence even more so. But the main thing I want to keep getting across is this is an individualized approach, and it varies by person. A lot of what I talk about in my courses is an individualized, holistic approach to treatment as well as the evaluation process. In the forensic psychology as well as the criminology field, we want to take all factors into consideration in trying to understand human behavior. And we may have different theories, we may have different psychological tests we use, and risk assessments and stuff like that, but it's really about taking a look at everything in the big picture and how we can constantly keep learning about these things. So there are characteristics of viewers that could influence how much violent media impacts aggression or violent behavior. An impressionable individual may possess numerous influential risk factors, such as their belief in the reality of the fictional character depicted in violent entertainment. It's this a different kind of connection that some individuals might have with certain characters, whether it's in a video game or in a film or anything like that. And it's also looking at their social environment. The person may be looking for an escape, something that is really, they're trying to find a way out of something and, looking at different ways to try to manage their emotions. Media content, the attractiveness of the perpetrator. For some individuals, if, maybe if they're, you've been bullied a lot, they have low self-esteem issues, they may see something in this character that's portrayed in some kind of violent media that is the opposite of the way they feel about themselves inside. They may see this perpetrator, this character, as someone who's very confident, and it's something that they gravitate towards. And there's lots of individuals who may have felt this way at a certain period of their life, but they didn't go on to commit, violent acts or anything, whereas others may. So this is kind of a good example to get you really thinking about more of that individual approach and how it affects everyone differently. And that's what we primarily need to be focused on. So when we look at social learning theory, basically a person learns behaviors through observing others, and they may imitate what they see. Children do this a lot. They're seeing what their parents are doing or other siblings or something like that. And then they start learning these behaviors by imitation. So when we apply this to violent media, is violent media something that causes the individual to respond with violence? Or was it something they related to that had no real impact on their decision to act aggressively? So this is, somewhat similar to what I was just talking about the previous slide, but, maybe kind of the opposite direction where the person does act violently, but it may not have a whole lot to do with the violent media. So once again, it's taking a look at that individual and all the other factors that may have contributed to these kind of things. And of course, taking a look at social learning as a whole. So many years ago, in the early 60s, there was something called the Albert Bandura's social learning bubble doll experiment. And this is a quick video that I would like to show. Hopefully I will not have any issues with that. So you can see. This is not working, is it? I don't know what happened. Oh, no problem with it. Well, anyway, the bubble doll experiment was basically experiment where they took a bunch of preschool children and they had a model, an adult female, who modeled these behaviors where she was, kicking this Bobo doll and kicking it, punching it, and saying, I'm going to kick him now, I'm going to hit him, those kind of things. So they showed this to these children, and then they placed them in individual rooms where they had access to all kinds of toys. And these children went for the Bobo doll, and they were participating in those same behaviors that was modeled for them. So it gives a good indication that this could be something that can be applied to violent media. This is something that's often referred to in violent media studies, is that we've known this for many years, we built on this research, and we're seeing this established link. I encourage you, if you're not familiar with this, look it up on YouTube. There's in this videos, it's very fascinating. The thing I think I found one of the most fascinating is there's at least one child who picks up a gun and he's shooting the Bobo doll, and I believe he's hitting it as well. This is something that wasn't modeled in those behaviors. They no one touched the gun. They think they had a hammer and they were hitting it, stuff like that. So this was something that this person took upon themselves and did. So we're looking at the link between violent media and forensic psychology. These areas are very important to keep in mind. Does an interest in violent video games, film, or music warrant a need to address violent media as a risk factor in the assessment of violence risk? Well, when you consider the link between the two, it should be something that could be considered as a risk factor. Again, this wouldn't be for maybe everyone that commit violent acts and consume violent media, but once again, it's taking that individual approach. We also want to look at other risk factors, such as biological factors, peer influence, history of mental illness, psychopathy traits, and of course, past history of violence. A couple of takeaways I'd like everyone to kind of think about with this. An individual may get an idea to commit a violent act from a film or a game, yet ideas are taken from every facet of society. We're all influenced or we're all inspired by something that maybe we read, we see, wherever we get this thought for a certain behavior, it is influenced by something. And regardless of where the idea initially originated, the person makes the decision to act on their violent thoughts. So yes, there is this established connection between the two, but we also need to be looking at that individual person and why they chose to act on these things. We don't want anything else to get lost along the way. We don't want any of the the perpetrators' motives and the other things that contributed to it if they happen to have an interest in violent media and that may heavily influence them. Again, we want to keep all those areas into consideration. So this is probably going to be at least 1 week that I'll be dedicating to this class. And I want to give students the opportunity to really do the research in these areas. I'll be supplying plenty of resources as well, but I want them to look past just those offered in the class, and maybe if there's something they're really interested in, to continue going down that path and researching this more. A lot of these questions are some of my initial research questions that I had in maybe undergraduate when I started looking at some of these areas that really interest me, or graduate school, or maybe in the past several years. So instead, some of these questions are some of the same ones that I initially had as going to guide this as well. So next, I'm going to talk about multi-perpetrator homicide. And this involves murderous dyads, as in two people, or team killers, so maybe three or more. We often hear the phrase killer couples, which is applied to a male and female counterpart who may have engaged in killing together. And that's something we see a lot on like the true crime shows and stuff like that. I am actually in the initial stages, I'm not saying initial stages, but some of the early stages of a pretty large research project about multi-perpetrator homicide. So I will be covering in this course, but this is also an area of interest that I've always had and I want to explore further. Some of the things I'll be looking at more is the relationship dynamics, including dominance, submission, and vulnerability. There is often one person who dominates the other person or others within a team. And we also see a lot of characteristics of psychopathy with these individuals. So they may have, a certain level of superficial charm. That may be how they entice the other person to, start interacting with them, or then eventually engaging in these behaviors. But a lot of these individuals may be very callous, very unemotional. They may lack empathy, lack guilt, remorse for their actions. And they also may be very cunning, very manipulative, which can be very detrimental when there's someone who is potentially very submissive and who's vulnerable. So the submissive perpetrator that is vulnerable to violence, someone who potentially has a history of abuse, neglect, social rejection, they may be consumed with vengeance. And it's the pairing of these two that, there is some need that's being met with each of them. And these are the kind of areas that I want to explore even more. There's all these relationship dynamics going on. So essentially, when two or more perpetrators feed off one another, if they had never met, would either participant have committed these acts alone? So this is a really good example of a question that does not necessarily have a yes or no answer, because it's very, very hard to determine that. There's always been something I was very interested in and wanted to explore further. So we take learning theory in relation to multi-perpetrator homicide. And, basic learning theory is just related to learning behaviors through experience. And these are the kind of things that could happen if, say, the dominant person may have participated in, murderous acts before, and then they are trying to entice the other person to participate along with them. And things to look at is, would the vulnerable person, or are they less likely to participate in murder or other criminal activities unless provoked or dominated by the lead? There's some, the more, submissive, vulnerable person, maybe you just really want to be a specter, want to just observe, whereas the more dominant character may want them to participate more in those kind of things. So, what happens at that point then? What leads to the next phase in this? Does the person with the dominant traits, do they manipulate the other person into achieving their goal by persuading them to participate in deviant acts that they never would have committed by themselves? So for some, they may have committed murder by themselves, but it wasn't, fulfilling whatever need it was, and they may essentially feel like they need an audience. They want someone there with them. Whether they're participating with them or not, that might be the central need they're getting met. So there's all these different areas to kind of look at as we learn more and more about these dynamic relationships over time. So this is probably one of my first questions. I remember I posed this one like years ago. Is an individual with high psychopathy so persuasive and manipulative that they can dominate and persuade the average person into committing murder? Or is the potential to commit these acts prevalent in the accomplice prior to this alliance? So this is another hard question to, really clearly identify, but something that might give it a little more clarity is the difference between psychopathy and sociopathy. These terms are often used interchangeably, but there is a difference between the two of them. Psychopathy's pathology is attributed to biological influences. Some of the things I was talking about before with the different characteristics of these individuals, with the callousness, lack of remorse, lack of empathy, not being able to feel a whole lot of emotions, those kind of things. Many of these individuals are born this way. They have an inability to feel empathy or the appropriate range of emotions. They've learned how to manipulate their environment by imitating what they see. We have sociopathy, is different. We're looking at societal influences. So things in this person's social environment that may have led to that. And essentially maybe the person, it's made. It's based on what they've experienced, looking at maybe if there's a certain wrong, something that there's a perceived wrong and they're seeking vengeance for that. That's something that we stick with them, whether it's recent or maybe years ago. And there's a lot of impulsivity. There is a lot of emotional outbursts. The person may be consumed with vengeance. So it could be this pairing of these two pathologies that can result in multi-perpetrator homicides. Another way to look at this is something that I cover in our violence and risk assessment course, where we're looking at the difference between predatory and effective violence. We often see, more of the predatory violence, is more in line with an individual with high psychopathy. Involves a lot of calculating, strategizing, a lot of patience involved. The person does not have to necessarily act on emotion. They can contain that. Whereas the effective approach to violence is someone who is very reactive, and this matches a lot more with the sociopathy that we may see. And so it's a difficulty managing emotions, reacting when very angry, once again, being very impulsive, those kind of things. That person may not be able to be calm or calculating any of those other kind of things. So when you can combine these two pathologies and these two approaches to violence, this is often this deadly combination that we see between the two. Okay. Right, so the last main area we'll be talking about is about mass hysteria, stereotyping, and coerced confessions. Another focus of this course will be social injustice. The goal of this content is to provide students with additional insight regarding false confessions and the negative impact of stereotyping individuals, as well as the victims of moral panic. So often what happens when there is a moral panic, there's mass hysteria, there is, this cognitive thought process that's occurring in this kind of crisis where people are wanting answers. They're very upset by something horrible that has happened, and we're looking for something that, either can be blamed or something that, can be resolved by, identifying the problem so it stops. So it's just kind of like this overall drive in this direction. But yeah, this can have some pretty serious consequences as well. So when we look at stereotyping, it has a major impact on many individuals. They may be labeled with a certain group that they may or may not necessarily identify with, and the certain group may be viewed negatively by society, by certain individuals. And even though the person is feeling this, and they have an understanding what stereotypical behaviors are and stuff like that, it still has an impact on them. And then that kind of leads into labeling theory or social reaction theory. And that occurs when a person internalizes these labels that have been provided by society from the outside. And, it becomes something that, they were just become so tired and so worn down by all of this that, this internalization happens. And these can, also lead to things such as coerced confessions or false confessions and those kind of things. So when we look at coerced false confessions, what are some possible explanations for false confession? Why would someone admit to crimes such as murder if they were innocent? From a social psychological perspective, how could one be coerced or pressured into confessing to a crime that they did not commit? So, again, this is an individual approach looking at the different factors that may have led to that. And we also want to consider vulnerable individuals who may have, intellectual, cognitive deficits. They may have trouble understanding what's going on during the interrogation process. We also have to look at, what occurred during the interrogation process. Many of them spend hours and hours in these sessions, and they become very exhausted. There's a lot of sleep deprivation. And some individuals may admit guilt to a crime they didn't commit because they want the whole process to end, or they may want to take their responsibility for someone else, or they're feeling some other kind of pressure. So there's all these things we want to take in consideration when it comes to false confessions and all the things that lead to it. And what the focus in this course will be about the West Memphis Three. So in the 1980s and 90s, there was this mass hysteria involving satanic cult activity known as the Satanic Panic. And this resulted in convictions of many individuals that allegedly participated in satanic rituals or satanic ritual abuse, as it's commonly referred to as SRA. In 1993, the mutilated bodies of 3 8-year-old boys were discovered in West Memphis, Arkansas. And investigators believe that these murders related to satanic cult activity, identifying one teenager as the prime suspect. And this individual, dressed in black, listened to heavy metal music, and he may have had some interest, I believe, in witchcraft and stuff like that. And, it kind of fit that, what people may have believed what was going on at that time, and may have believed that was part of satanic ritual abuse. And the conviction of this individual, as well as two others, was based on false witness testimony and the false confession of one teenager that implicated the other two. Many years later, these individuals were released, but if you're not familiar with this case at all and it's of interest to you, there is a few documentaries. One, West of Memphis, I believe it's called. I think it's on Netflix. There's three parts, and it's very interesting. It's something that I think that I wish to take a closer look at to see, how these things happen and how these individuals are affected by this, as well as that entire community as a whole. It's all just very saddening. So that is my last spot. I think I went right to time. Additional topics I'm going to talk about in this class. We'll talk about more about satanic panic, mass hysteria, recovering false memories, obedience and moral disengagement, the influential power of cult leaders, serial killers and mass murderers, and the application of popular criminology to horror films. With serial killers and mass murderers, I'm probably looking more at specialized topics in that area. Kind of like the idea of looking at more historical serial killers that many people often don't realize were actually historical serial killers, like the Jill DeRay, Vlad Dracula, Elizabeth Bathory. All these individuals were in positions of power and ability, and that they were able to continue to engage in these behaviors for a very long time for this reason. Other areas I was thinking about is looking at serial killers' use of the insanity defense, and looking at how many had applied NGRI or not guilty by reason of insanity. I think one area that might be of interest is compare and contrast Jeffrey Dahmer as well as Ed Gein. They both pled insanity, and they had both very different cases. So I think that might be a good area to kind of take a closer look at. And of course, the application of popular criminology to horror films is another area I've been recently interested in the past several years. It's very interesting when we take, criminology theories and we're seeing all this research out there that is being applied to films and, music and all these other areas. It's very interesting. All right, that's all I have. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy this.
Thank you, Dr. Meadows, for that presentation. So what you all saw today is just a 20-minute glimpse into our forensic psychology courses. If you want to dive deeper to understand the psychological drivers of behavior, check out the criminology and forensic psychology program pages on the Chicago School's website at thechicagoschool.edu. Our next section tackles one of the most critical and complex challenges that we see in modern justice, which is police use of deadly